right. Were we going to have everybody here today, Crystal?
What?
Were we going to have everybody here today?
I don't believe I've heard from Norris.
Okay. Okay. So Norris is basically a question markable. Okay. There's 4 of us. I believe we had the absolute minimum for our quorum. Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Cool. All right. Well, it is 4 o'clock, so let us get started, shall we? All right, folks. Want to call the Zoning Board of Appeals meeting here for September 13, 2022 to order. A quick note is some administrative information up front. The process today will be where basically we'll open the public hearing after we go through some of our routine on the agenda here. At that point, I will ask for staff to share the staff report on the given item we'll be speaking to at that time, after which we will then ask the applicant to come forward, provide any additional information that was not already addressed in the staff report. And then after that, there's questions from the board. We'll, of course, ask the applicant. If there are none, then we'll, of course, ask the audience if there's anybody here for or against this particular item. And if there are none, then we'll close that public hearing and then move the deliberation to the board itself, at which time we'll have our internal discussion, and if we need to ask staff or if they need to share anything additional, that'll be the procedure. After that, we'll render the decision and then move on to the next item on the agenda. So, having said that, Crystal, will you note the attendance, please, ma'am?
Board Member Delaware?
Here.
Board Member Hanner?
Here.
Board Member Lindsay is not here. Board Member Jones?
Here.
Board Member Moreno?
Here.
And Board Member Rogers?
Here.
All right. Which brings us now to the additions and deletions to the agenda, and I would entertain a motion here to change the agenda up where item Z0422 will be moved first, and A0222 will be moved to number 2 position.
I move that item B, 5B, move to 5A. So zoning Z04-22, zoning variance request become the first item under number 5.
Do we have support?
Support.
Okay, moving supported. Any discussion? All right, hearing none. If all in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? All right, then it carries. So that's how we'll start the meeting today, is with item 5B, C-04-22, the zoning variance request. So what we'll do here is I will ask for staff to please give us staff report.
So this is for variance Z-04-22. This is requesting a dimensional variance to allow Pure Roots LLC's property to be used for an adult marijuana retail facility despite being within 1,000 feet of a marijuana provisioning center in Emmett Township. Sorry. Okay. Sorry about that. I have my pages a little mixed up here. Okay, number 2. All right. So I'm going to start out with a little bit with the history of this one. Pure Roots, the applicant for the subject property, is contending in their variance that the use of medical marijuana provisioning center is an existing non-conforming use. The applicant Previous to Pure Roots submitting the application for the Part A adult use marijuana, Pure Roots did obtain their conditional Part A for their medical marijuana provisioning center June 19th, 2020, before Ascend Cannabis in Emmett Township. They're the ones that are within the 1,000-foot distance requirement, obtained their C of O. So they obtained their Part A, Pure Roots did, before Ascend came in. They obtained a temporary certificate of occupancy, Pure Roots did, from the city of Battle Creek on June 3rd, 2022, with an expiration date of October 31st, 2022. So for a couple years, they've been working toward their medical marijuana. Pure Roots had also obtained their provisioning center license from the state of Michigan during this time, with an expiration date of 1/16/2023. They have not yet obtained their final Part B application approval or medical marijuana provisioning center license from the city of Battle Creek. So they're working toward it. They have their state license, but they haven't quite finished. They haven't come back to the city to finish the Part B. In the meantime, Ascend Cannabis, formerly Michigan Supply and Provisions, received their C of O for provisioning for their facility on 8/4/2020. They also received from Emmett Township their adult use retail license in 2020. Now, on June 3rd, 2022, Pure Roots applied for their Part A adult use marijuana establishment permit. Pure Roots AUME Part A, June 3rd, 2022 application was reviewed by zoning, and the proposed site for the adult use marijuana retail establishment was found to be within the 1,000 feet, as we normally do for any new marijuana license application. They were found to be within 1,000 feet of an existing licensed recreational provisioning center and adult use marijuana retail establishment located at, and there is a map in your packet as well as the map that our GIS department did here. We always have backup maps and double check ourselves when we're doing these. Which is located at 6010B Drive North, Battle Creek, Ascend Cannabis. So thus, the proposed license did not meet the city's zoning ordinance setback requirement as stated in section 1251.24. What they are contending is that they now have an existing non-conforming medical marijuana provisioning center at their, at their location. I believe it's 5805 Beckley. And that per the section of the zoning ordinance, which is interesting, in chapter 1270, nonconformities, it talks about continuance changes if no structural alteration is made to a legal nonconforming use of a building. It may be changed to another nonconforming use of the same or a more restricted classification. So planning staff looked at this very thoroughly along with the attorney staff, and planning staff finds merit in Pure Roots' argument. First, although the medical marijuana provisioning license has not yet been issued, the Part B, by the City of Battle Creek, all of the other requirements up through issuance by the city of a temporary certificate of occupancy, the state of Michigan cannabis license approval, have all been accomplished, as well as all of the improvements to the property that need to be done for a cannabis license. So all of the steps for approval of the medical marijuana, except approval, the final approval of the Part B, which basically entails them to bring all of their now completed state licensing back to the city for their city final license. So everything up to that point has been accomplished. So at this point, planning staff agrees that the use of a medical marijuana provisioning exists. However, that use will cease to exist if the applicant does not complete their Part B and receive their license from the city as soon as possible. I've suggested the next 30 days. However, we do not currently have a deadline for that, but staff is actively working on amending the ordinance to put a deadline in there for Part B. Therefore, the use does exist, and the use is also non-conforming because the medical marijuana provisioning center is now within the 1,000-foot distance requirement of another marijuana facility. The next part of their argument is that the use of adult marijuana retail can be considered equivalent to or in the same classification as a marijuana medical use. And staff took a look at this and took a look at zoning districts and found that marijuana provisioning centers and marijuana retail facilities are always classified together in a zoning district. You do not find one like in the B2, for example, without the other. And are also either both a use by right or listed as a special use. You won't find one listed as a use by right and one as a special use. Again, they're treated the same in the zoning districts. Therefore, planning staff agrees that the use of marijuana adult retail and the use of marijuana provisioning center are the same classification of use. This does not mean that they have the same license or are treated the same in the licensing procedure, but as far as a use goes, they are the same classification of use. In order for a variance to be granted for the adult use, which would still be necessary because the adult use is a new license being applied for. So therefore, they still need this variance from the 1,000-foot distance requirement. It's almost like it has two layers. You've got an application for marijuana, which is treated a little differently by the city code, and then the use of marijuana adult and medical, which is treated pretty similarly in the zoning districts. And in the zoning ordinance, it's got the section on nonconforming use that talks about change to another nonconforming use of the same or more restricted classification. That's section 1270.01B of the city's zoning ordinance. You can do that. First, you need to, but you can't have both. You need to swap one for the other. It's kind of interesting. In addition, that section, probably to ensure that it's the same classification of use, stipulates that no other improvements to the building in regard to the adult use could be made. In other words, the same improvements for medical have to be the same improvements for adult use. It's not talking about, of course, a mechanical failure of something. It's talking about the improvements to the building that you would need to have in order to have this use. So the City of Battle Creek Zoning Board of Appeals may grant a dimensional variance if there are practical difficulties relating to the construction, structural changes, or alteration of buildings, or structures related to dimensional requirements of the zoning ordinance, or to any other non-use related standard in the ordinance in the way of carrying out the strict letter of the zoning ordinance. So number one, when it can be shown that a practical difficulty would in fact exist if the strict non-use requirements of the zoning ordinance were applied. In this case, the hardship is caused by the new license application, which triggered the dimensional requirement of the 1,000 feet, basically requiring the applicant's property to have a setback where normally, if it were another property, if it were not marijuana, The zoning ordinance allows for changing out, if you want to say that, changing out of non-conforming uses, swapping one for the other if they're a similar classification. So there is a practical difficulty to the subject property as there is an existing marijuana use that became non-conforming due to another marijuana facility locating within the 1,000 feet of Pure Roots in Emmett Township, Ascend Cannabis. Therefore, the variance shall be for another use of the same classification because it suddenly had to, because of the licensing, face the, being within the 1,000 feet, to occupy the building within the 1,000-foot distance at the same location. Number two, the practical difficulty must be exceptional and peculiar to the subject parcel of land. This is fairly peculiar and exceptional because this already existed when Ascend Cannabis came in, and were it not for the fact that this were an existing medical marijuana facility, it could be swapped out if it were a similar classification of use, of non-conforming use, according to the zoning ordinance, without getting the variance. A variance shall not be granted when it will alter or conflict with the intent of this ordinance. Allowing an exchange of one non-conforming use with another non-conforming use of the same classification would not be in conflict with the city's zoning ordinance due to the language in section 1270.01B that allows usually another non-conforming use of the same or more restricted classification as long as no structural alteration is made to the building. And then finally, of course, any variance granted shall be the minimum necessary, and this would be the minimum necessary. Staff recommendation is, based on the findings of fact as detailed above, in the report, staff recommends approval of the applicant's requested non-use dimensional variance as there is a practical difficulty peculiar to the subject parcel. The variance will not conflict with the zoning ordinance. Staff strongly recommends that the variance be approved only, however, with the following conditions. One, that the applicant obtain their Part B approval by the city and final medical marijuana provisioning license for their existing subject facility. Two, that the applicant resubmit Part A for their adult use marijuana retail facility. Three, that the applicant submit the zoning board's decision letter with these conditions to the City of Battle Creek Cannabis Coordinator. Four, that the applicant then formally in writing ask to discontinue their medical marijuana provisioning license. Five, that the applicant not have to have additional building permits obtained in order for the adult use to exist at their marijuana retail facility. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, at this point, if the representative that's speaking here for this particular application will come forward and give your name and address for the record, please.
Hi, good afternoon. Jeffrey Schroeder, 38505 Woodward Avenue, Bloomfield Hills, Michigan. Happy to come here to Battle Creek tonight. It's my first time here. I've been in front of many zoning boards across the state. Just at this point, want to add that we concur with the staff recommendation. With respect to condition one, we would agree to the 30-day requirement suggested earlier for completion of the Part B. In fact, my client is here and said that could be done within the next couple of days. We do believe we meet the criteria at a risk of repeating what's already here and what was already reported by staff. We're here to answer any questions you have about us meeting the approval criteria or any other general questions you have. The building is done, it's complete, and there will be no changes made to swap it out for an adult use facility. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I don't have any particular questions. Clearly acknowledge that you and client are prepared to accept the conditions that were outlined in the staff report, so I'm comfortable in that regard. Board members, are there questions for the applicant?
I have none.
Mr. Anderson? Jones, I'm sorry.
Okay, I was looking, do we have a new member? Yeah, we do. Are you currently in operation? I guess I'm a little unclear about that.
At this location, no.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Any other board members' questions?
Not for the applicant, I have questions for the staff.
Please proceed.
I'm just looking at the map, it shows 6008, but we're referring to 610. Where is this Ascend Cannabis? Because that's a gas station that I recall.
Yes, it is right next door to the gas station. I'm not sure what that was
Horton.
before, if that was a convenience store or what that was, but it,
There used to be a Caribou Coffee there.
Yeah.
Oh, it's the
Oh,
suite
okay.
next to the gas station?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's in that same?
correct, yes.
Okay.
I have a question for staff. So maybe it's my COVID brain, so forgive me for that.
Your microphone.
Okay, get a little closer here. You were talking about, I get the change of use for that, but you kept mentioning that we couldn't do this if it was based on the use. And it seems to me that this is a use issue. This is not a physical issue. This isn't any other thing. This is a use issue. And I guess I'm confused that why are you recommending when it, maybe I just don't understand that ordinance. Can you go over that part about the ordinance about changing, you can change for non-use causes?
Yes, you can change to another non-conforming use of the same or a more restricted classification, as long as there are no other improvements to the building.
Right, it was before that. It was, you were reading something before that section.
Okay, so I'm not exactly sure
There was a,
question you're,
there was an earlier section that you were reading that you had distinguished that as long as this is not for a use reason. What section?
I know I did talk about if this was another use, but it wasn't marijuana, it wouldn't be a variance. This happens to have an additional layer of the marijuana licensing on top
Right,
of.
I understand that. You were talking about, you weren't talking, oh, sorry about that. You weren't talking about marijuana. You were reading something from the general code that said,
I can quote it exactly. 1270.01B, if no structural alteration is made to a legal nonconforming use of a building, it may be changed to another nonconforming use of the same or a more restricted classification.
it was after that.
Okay. And I did, after that, I talked about looking through the zoning ordinance to see where the use of adult marijuana retail and the use of medical marijuana provisioning, if they were mentioned separately in any of the zoning districts, which they were
Okay.
not. They're always either listed together or not allowed. Also, whether they were broken out and whether one might be a special use at one point and one might be used by right in the same zoning district, that never happens either.
Okay.
So the zoning pretty much treats them.
Right, but it was, okay. Do you have your notes highlighted or anything like that? If you could, just continue down.
Okay. Let's see. The Zoning Board of Appeals may grant a dimensional variance if there are practical difficulties relating to the construction, et cetera. That's the whole, when you can grant a variance.
Right.
And then I added, let's see, in this case, when I started talking about, there are the four considerations for a variance. And the first one about practical difficulty, I said in this case, the hardship is caused by the new license application, which triggers the dimensional requirement, basically requiring the applicant's property to have a setback. Where
But-
normally,
So-
zoning ordinance is that,
Where in the zoning ordinance are we? Since we have a copy, thank you. What section in the zoning ordinance are we?
oh, for the 1,000-foot setback?
No, between the two sections that you were just reading, what section were you just quoting from?
That's my own writing. I'm just saying, in this case, the hardship is caused by the new license application,
Okay,
because that's the
the
1,000.
section before that was, the section before that, what was the section before that? You were quoting the ordinance,
Okay.
I'm sorry.
1280.03, that's the zoning board of appeals, and that's the 4 criteria
But
listed.
it was before the 4
Before that.
criteria.
Okay, so 1270.01, that's the one that stipulates that no other improvements, I'm sorry, that you can basically swap out the uses if they're the same classification, and as long as no other improvements to the building in regard to the use need to be made.
There was some section where you just quoted, you were reading them verbatim, and you said that as long as, it essentially said that this section applies, or doesn't apply, one or the other, if it's a use variance.
Let's see. Are you talking about maybe, let's see, but backing up before that, I say planning staff agrees that the use of medical marijuana provisioning exists.
That was at the very end.
Okay. However, this use will cease to exist if the applicant does not complete their Part B and receive
Way
a
before
license.
that, way before that.
Okay.
So a question, if I may, please.
Sure.
Is there something specific that we're trying
So-
to discern?
Yes, there is. So specifically, so this obviously is formed because the use is causing, if this wasn't a medical marijuana, and if the use wasn't medical marijuana, we wouldn't be having this discussion. And so in the point that she read, it said, if use, my paraphrase, okay? It said, if you can do this for everything but a use reason. You cannot, basically my paraphrase, if I heard her correctly, was you cannot do this if this is being done for a use reason. And this is definitely a use reason. So if that section was there, then, I mean, I'm not trying to be a stick in the mud, and maybe I misunderstood it, but what I heard her read was you can change for all these reasons, but you cannot change if this is because of a use.
Yeah, okay.
So it basically sounds like there's a little bit of confusion on the fact of the use, on the use of the term use. With the medical marijuana, as zoning administrator did state, it has 2 layers within itself, and that to me is where I found myself questioning that entire approval process and the use and the non-conformant matter that came up as part of this package. So I basically looked through it, and with the zoning administrator's confirmation that this was basically part of that 2-layer conversation, and the fact that all we're really talking about is a non-conformant use within the medical marijuana process.
But that's the point, that key word right there. This is a nonconformance use. And if our ordinance says that you cannot do this because for a use reason only, then this is a use reason only. I'd like to vote yes, but I want to clarify to make sure that we're conforming to our own laws. Yes, sir.
I think you said earlier we wouldn't be here if, and the way I would finish that sentence is, if there were not another facility within 1,000 feet in Emmett Township that ascend the place next to the gas station, which puts us in the zone of a potential dimensional variance, meaning that had that not been there, this would have been approved, and now we're within 1,000 feet, a buffer zone of another use, which, by the way, I'll mention Emmett Township does not have a reciprocal ordinance.
We have a bad neighbor.
And so I would finish the sentence that way and say that that puts us in this zone of a non-use variance.
No, it doesn't. Because the use defines the 1,000-foot. The only thing requiring that 1,000-foot barrier is the use. It's not because of a physical reason. It's not because of a traffic reason. It's not because of any other reason other than the specific use of the two buildings. As far as Emmett Township, I will agree. We have an uncooperative neighbor, and that doesn't negate our laws. You know, they can make their laws pertaining to their land. We make the laws pertaining to our land. And so, but it still comes back to, you know, you read a section, and I just don't know what section that was.
Okay, and I've been,
In the staff report, is that correct, Susan?
yes.
So perhaps
And
while she's looking
right,
at the
everything,
staff report,
right.
perhaps you could peruse what you thought you heard for identification purposes?
So, okay.
Because backing all the way up, oh,
Let's
go
just
ahead.
give him a minute to
Okay, okay,
get through this, because
Okay.
we need to make sure that we get this question clear.
right.
Shoot. Where was the staff report for former item B? I'm lost in all of the paperwork. Sorry.
That's okay. This
Aren't
was
we all?
quite a packet and quite a Rubik's Cube of a report. So this would be the second staff report, and you might be looking for page 3 of the second staff report,
Okay,
which would be for the non-use
I
variance.
think I found it.
And if-
Commissioner Jones, just to make sure, if you look in the upper right-hand corner, it should say non-use variance Z-0422.
Thank you.
You have the right one? Okay. Thank you.
Oh, wait a minute. No, that's a different.
On my page is page 7. Here.
Oh, thank you. Right, this is the summary of her staff recommendation. It's not what she read. She was reading from the ordinance.
Page 1, page front.
Multiple pages?
Oh,
So
okay.
page back.
Her analysis begins on page 5, I believe.
Okay. To grant specific sections in 128003,
That would be us.
And I started reading from the history.
Oh, you went before.
Yeah, so before the analysis, I read from the history, and I'm wondering if that's where, because there were a couple other sections I cited there.
Right.
In the history.
so what were those other sections?
1251.24,
Which says?
city's zoning ordinance requires the 1,000-foot setback measurement between
Okay.
property lines.
Okay, it's the section that dealt with a change.
And the only section that deals with the change is section 1270.01, which talks about if no structural alteration is made to a legal nonconforming use of a building, it may be changed to another nonconforming use, and that's where the word use is mentioned twice, of the same or more restricted classification.
Which is where we're at right now, because it is a more restrictive use that they're going to go into, correct?
I guess at the time I,
So, on the bottom of what's called, or middle way of, through what's called page 6 of, I think this is a staff report. It's a couple of pages later. Goodness. Yeah, it's a staff report, page 6. When it can be shown that a practical difficulty would in fact exist if the strict non-use requirements of the zoning ordinance, list them, were applied to a specific building project, the board may grant a variance from these requirements. The practical difficulty from a failure to grant a variance must include substantially more than mere convenience or mere inability to hire reform. And it had to do with sorry, I apologize. I had COVID in June and my brain is foggy, so I apologize for that. There was something you were reading in this section where you quoted, just like this, if in fact exists if the strict non-use requirements of the zoning ordinance. And there was something else you were reading, you were actually reading from the code. Let's see. So, the paragraph before that. The City of Battle Creek Zoning Board of Appeals may grant a dimensional variance if there are practical difficulties, and this is paragraph 3 on page 6. May grant a dimensional variance if there are practical difficulties relating to the construction, structural changes, or alterations of buildings or structures related to dimensional requirements of the zoning ordinance or to any other non-use related standard in the ordinance in the way of carrying out the strict letter of the zoning ordinance. In granting the variance, the board should observe the spirit of the ordinance and ensure that the public safety is secured and justice is done. So that's what I heard, that we cannot grant an appeal based on a use variance, and this is a use variance. What does the rest of the commission think? Or I've heard you. What does, sir?
Well, I mean, I think the history on this property is interesting. They were approved for medical marijuana.
Sure.
They
Yep.
were within the requirements. While they're going through the process of renovation, my assumption, getting prepared to open, and then they decide to switch to the next license. A neighbor in an adjacent township opens up a shop. That suddenly changes the 1,000-foot variance. So,
But we had a case about that, and we
true,
said,
true, but the license was already granted. They were approved. They could open right now with a medical marijuana license.
okay,
Okay, they're approved because it was approved before that other store opened up.
gotcha.
Okay, so what we're talking about here is, are they allowed to change their product essentially, as long as they don't renovate the building and follow the requirements that were submitted in this staff recommendation? You know,
So,
and I also look at it, I know we have a 1,000-foot property line, but this is another example where that point of the ordinance really needs to be re-examined, because if I were to jump in my automobile on this property and I were to leave from that suite, which is on the far side of that property, and try to get out in traffic and then drive to the other facility, I'm certainly going to travel a lot more than 1,000 feet. So when we're talking about public safety of 1,000 feet, I have to look at that too,
And
I understand the property line issue, but this is also a rented one on this one too, which is a difference, they don't own it, 'cause they don't own the gas station, so.
I happen to agree with you on that, but unfortunately, in fairness to a previous applicant before you joined the board, we had somebody who wanted to put, there's a green building down here on Michigan Avenue, and he was 994 feet away from Willard Library. And we did not grant it because he was within 1,000 feet of Willard Library. So now if I have to be fair to the other applicant, I can't consider the practical, whether it's birds, it's a bird flight, or if you go zigzaggy. I mean, I would definitely consider this to be a completely different neighborhood than Willard Library. I mean, you got to cross a river, you got to go through downtown, et cetera, et cetera. So I would agree with you on that. To your point about, I guess it comes back to, why are we granting a dimensional variance? And in this case, in the section up here, it says we can't grant a dimensional variance because of the use. But we had already granted a dimensional variance for the use, for medical marijuana. In order to get a medical marijuana license, didn't you have to have?
No.
No, okay.
There wasn't one required because that building wasn't there.
Correct.
There-
So I think we need to move on, and there are other questions that are wanting to be asked.
Yes,
So
I'm sorry. Go
please.
ahead, sir.
Not a question, but I might give you a hook to hang your hat on in regards to jurisdictional issue, which is two-part. One, the preliminary statements within the zoning code grant the Board of Appeal relatively broad latitude in making the decisions. More specifically, the zoning code very clearly allows the applicant to appeal to the board. There may be a small inconsistency in the law that says the applicant has the right to appeal to the board, but the board doesn't have the right to rule on the applicant's appeal. I'm willing to go with the initial determination that if the applicant has the right to apply for an appeal, then we just by definition have the right to rule on that appeal. And I find myself personally happy with that form of logic.
I think I come back to, in granting the variance, the board should observe the spirit of the ordinance, ensure that public safety is secured and substantial justice is done. And in that sense, you had already started this. You were already there. You could open the store. It is a use variance, but the problem is that it's really not a use variance because you're, like he said, you're just changing your product. And you're really not even changing your product, you're just changing who you're selling to, technically, quote unquote. So I find in that public safety will be secured and that the spirit of the ordinance and substantial justice is in your favor. So, thank you. Sorry I took that long. I just, we have to be fair to all of our applicants, and we've had a lot of cases.
Thank you. I very much enjoy these discussions. And I would point out that, we did look at some of the other appeals that came before this board before we came here, because we knew we had to distinguish ourselves from someone who had previously been denied. And this facility was completely permitted and built out. I think some others came before the board that hadn't received their certificate of occupancy approvals and made the investment. But I appreciate your thoughts, and I can answer any other questions.
Thank you. Package, please.
Oh, this is your copy?
Yes, thank you.
Sorry.
All right, then.
Commissioner Moreno?
Yes.
If I may, on the heels of Mr. Schroeder's comments, a nice segue here. Condition number 5, I would like to have clarified that Ms. Cronander wrote that the applicant not have to have additional building permits obtained for the adult use marijuana retail facility. I would like to make sure that there is the understanding that is not to be construed to mean that in the future, should additional work be required or sought by the applicant, the normal building permit process would be filed. Just the way it's written, it was a little awkward, but I would ask Ms. Cronander if that was her intent.
Yes.
And if so, that be acknowledged
included?
or understood by the applicant.
So I'm going to change your hat a little bit. We don't have a motion on the floor, so as a rule of order, how do we properly do that before we make our motion?
You can include that in the, when making the motion with the conditions, and then just clarify that fifth condition, that just the way it's written, it could go down that road, and I don't think the applicant would, I'm not trying to impute that the applicant's going there, but it's happened in the past, and so.
Agreed. Agreed. Are there any other questions or discussions?
Just one discussion, the applicant suggested adding 30 days to item number 1. Should we amend that as well?
That can be included when we get to the point of our internal discussion, yes.
Okay.
All right then, let's move on. If there are no further questions from the board here to the applicant, is there anybody here to speak for this appeal? Is there anybody here to speak for this appeal? Is there anybody here to speak against this appeal? Anybody here to speak against this appeal? All right then, hearing none, I close this public hearing and entertain a motion for Z-04-22, the non-use variance request.
I'll be happy to make the motion. Apparently, a little bit of wordsmithing is going to be necessary, if I understand. We'll start the motion to approve the applicant's petition for a zoning variance. And I'm going to look over to our wonderful attorney, who will assist me with the wording.
May I suggest, with the conditions as set forth in the staff report, with the amended provision that item number 1, am I in the right one?
If you're talking about time frame.
Right.
Be completed within 30 days, and that item number 5 not be construed to prevent the required building permits for future work.
I truly couldn't have said it better myself.
Excellent. Do we have support?
Support.
Okay, we have the motion and we have support with the proposed amendment to both number 1 and number 5 of the conditions in the staff report.
Correct.
All right. So, is there any discussion we need to entertain regarding the proposed amendments to these conditions in the staff report? None? All right then. Please, Crystal, if you'll the vote.
Board Member Delaware?
I approve.
Board Member Hanner?
I agree with the staff recommendation and the report, yes.
Board Member Jones?
Aye. Yes.
Okay. Board Member Moreno?
I agree and approve with the staff recommendations here and the conditions along with the proposed amendments to those recommendations in the staff report.
And Board Member Rogers?
I vote aye on the proposed motion.
All right.
All right then, the motion has been carried. Gentlemen, you have been approved. Please work with the planning staff to proceed through your requirements here that have been identified for you. And good luck.
Do we need them to withdraw the next?
That'll be the next item. Thank you. So before you leave, we do have to have a conversation, which is the item 5A, which was the zoning administrator's decision. And we need to ask you as the applicant, did you want us to proceed to that proposal, or would you rather just withdraw it?
Motion to I don't make the motion.
You can state your decision, and then we'll take it from there.
Okay. Jeffrey Schroeder, 38505 Woodward, Bloomfield Hills, Michigan. On behalf of the applicant, we ask to withdraw this petition and thank the board for putting this in the proper order.
All right, sir. And the only thing we would do here, before we take care of business here internally, is that please put that in writing to the city zoning administrator, please, so we have it for the record, that it was agreed that you have requested that proposal to be, well, that petition to be withdrawn.
Will do, thank you.
All right, so at that point, the appeal here of the zoning administrator's decision, A0222, I'd entertain a motion here to accept the petitioner's request to withdraw.
So moved.
Is there support?
Support.
It's moved and supported. Any discussion from us internally, the board? Excellent. Crystal, if you'll call the vote.
Board Member Delaware? What do you?
We're approving to withdraw?
Yes,
Yeah.
sir.
Approved, yes.
Okay.
Okay. Yes.
Board Member Hanner?
Approved. Yes.
Board Member Jones?
Aye.
Board Member Moreno?
Approved.
And Board Member Rogers?
Aye.
All right, then. Motion has been made, carried, and we are now done with that appeal. We now have Appeal Z0522, which is zoning dimensional variance request from Devon Wilson for Sunlight Gardens. And we will go through the procedure we explained earlier, an administrative procedure. So, Susan, if you will, the staff report, please, ma'am.
Thank you. I believe that is Mr. Sullivan's report.
Mr. Sullivan, I'm sorry.
Thank you. So this is an application from Mr. Devon Wilson. He's the owner of Sunlight Gardens at 245 Kendall Street. He is applying for a dimensional variance to construct an 8-foot tall deer fence on the property to protect the property from deer entering the property and eating the product that they're growing. Just some quick history on this property. This was previously owned by Sprout Gardens. Mr. Wilson, in the time since Sprout Gardens went in 2012 for a special use permit, Mr. Wilson has purchased this property and is now operating, or is preparing to operate it as Sunlight Gardens. The property, again, in 2012 went before the Planning Commission and the City Commission for a special use permit. At that time, the ordinance required that a community garden that was privately operated to receive a special use permit. At that point, the garden was owned by the county and was actually a public garden, so the garden itself didn't require the special use permit. However, a few aspects of the way that Sprout was running it did. They were running some classes in association with the garden, and so the owner at that time applied and received the special use permit. Now, as a part of their application package, they indicated that at some point in the future they would be applying for a variance for 8-foot tall deer fencing. There's no indication in staff's records that that variance was ever applied for and brought before the Zoning Board of Appeals. There appears to be some evidence that at some point there was some deer fencing placed on the site. However, that fencing is no longer in existence, and the current owner is now making that application that the original owner intended to apply for back in 2012 when they applied for their special use permit. This application that you see in front of you applies to both 245 Kendall Street, which is parcel number 8870-00-042-0, as well as parcel 8870-00-040-0. That second parcel is currently owned by the Calhoun County Land Bank. Mr. Wilson's in the process right now of purchasing that property. Assuming that purchase is completed, he will own that entire city block. So all he will have throughout the entire property is front yard space. Front yards in residential districts, fencing is restricted to 4 feet in height. Mr. Wilson has stated that in order to successfully operate a community garden, deer fencing of 8 feet in height is required in order for him to, again, to feasibly or successfully run that operation. Community gardens are a permitted use by right in the R1B zoning district, and so he fully be in compliance with the use regulations. What Mr. Wilson, again, and the subject of this application that you see in front of you is for is strictly for the 8-foot tall fencing. Now, the applicant has indicated that they will be making use of a portion, at least, of some of the existing 4-foot chain link fence that right now is constructed on the property line. Now, it's my understanding that there's likely some repair and replacement that's going to happen with portions of that fence. But the applicant's intention is to utilize what he can of that and then repair and replace what he can. And then additionally, 4 feet inside of that, so inside of the property line, construct that 8-foot tall deer fence, with the thinking being that sort of double barrier, again, provides additional protection from deer being able to leap the barrier. Staff, in researching this item, found and included it as links in your staff report, a couple of items, one from Michigan State University Extension and one from the University of California Education System, that both confirm Mr. Wilson's stance that an 8-foot fence likely is what's required here to successfully deter deer. 8 feet appears to be what is recommended, again, by both MSU and the University of California when it comes to non-electrified fences in order to deter deer. That deer can likely clear a fence of anything less than that height. Again, the applicant is applying on behalf right now of the Calhoun County Land Bank for that additional parcel that he's not currently in ownership of. However, again, I know that they're in the process right now of purchasing that. Again, in doing further research on this property, staff looked at the fact that the property is in fairly close proximity to the Kalamazoo River, which also included a link in your staff report to a report that discusses what are termed wildlife corridors in the Kalamazoo River, and that entrance corridor right there into the city to the south of Mr. Wilson's property would definitely qualify as what would be viewed as a wildlife corridor, and really kind of it encourages, or it provides a habitable environment for deer and for wildlife of that nature. Additionally, to the west, you have Irving Park, which provides additional water sources. And probably most importantly, if you look directly to the west of this property across Oneida, there's a large expanse of wooded vacant property, which again, these are all items that really serve to produce a habitable area for deer to congregate. In staff's opinion, that is the hardship that's involved with this property. If you look at that in combination strictly with the size of the property, again, encompassing that entire city block, and going off of the applicant's statement that obviously the 8-foot fence is necessary, and that being backed up by information from Michigan State University and the University of California, I think provided the basis here for the applicant's request. Again, staff would recommend approval of this request. Staff finds that there is a practical difficulty or hardship associated with this property. Staff finds that the practical difficulty is exceptional and peculiar to the subject parcel. In this case, subject parcels. Again, we're talking about a large expanse, larger than what a normal community garden within the city would be. Additionally, again, you have that wooded area immediately to the west, a large expanse of vacant property, as well as those water sources in close proximity. A variance shall not be granted when it will alter or conflict with the intent of the ordinance, considering the public benefits intended to be secured by the zoning code and the rights of others whose property would be affected by the allowance of the variance. Staff does not find that the proposed fence in accordance with this use would be in conflict with the intent of the ordinance. However, I will call out that staff does recommend, if the board were to approve this variance, that a condition to that approval be that the 8-foot tall fencing would be to apply only to the use as a community garden. So in the future, if the owner at some point decided to change the use of this property or sells the property to a new owner in the future who decides that they want to use it for single-family purposes, this is not a variance that is intended for, again, for single-family or other use purposes, so that someone could not come in then and point to this variance and say, I'm going to construct an 8-foot fence in my front yard, at the front yard of my single-family lot. So again, that's with regard to the condition that staff would recommend. Would recommend that the board condition this variance to apply only to the community garden use. And then finally, any variance granted shall be the minimum necessary to provide relief for the practical difficulty to the applicant. Again, based on the information that staff was able to find, the 8-foot appears to be the minimum necessary. Anything shorter than that would require some other form of a barrier, some sort of electrification, which is not allowed within the city. And so based on those, that criteria, based on the research that staff has done in the applicant's proposal, staff finds that this meets the criteria for a non-use variance to be granted with that condition that was discussed, and staff recommends approval.
Thank you. If the applicant will please come forward, give your name and address for the record, and then any additional information you want to share that wasn't already provided in the staff report that you feel we might need to know and understand.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm Devon Wilson, 229 Richards Place here in Battle Creek, Michigan. And yeah, I think Travis did a great job of kind of laying out everything, but you know, basically we have tried to operate our program without the deer fence, and it has been to a great loss. And a lot of farmers that I talked to experience the same thing. You know, like he said, we have a lot of deer in that area, and us just growing things how we have been, it's kind of like if you have a hole in your boat and you're trying to scoop the water out rather than fix the hole, you know. So we gotta act. We really need to. It's essential to our business to be able to have this deer fence. And if you have any other questions, I'm happy to answer. I appreciate you guys hearing me today.
All right, thank you, sir. I have no questions at this moment. Board members? All right then. I'll ask the question. Is there anybody here in the audience to speak for this appeal? Is there anybody in the audience here today to speak for this appeal? All right, if you will please give your name and address for the record.
Yep, John Hart, City of Battle Creek, 10 North Division Street, Small Business Development Director, and just here to offer support as well for the application, in that we've been helping along with others like BCU to try to help support this project. So, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anybody here to speak for this appeal? Is there anybody here to speak against this appeal? Anybody here to speak against this appeal? All right, hearing none, then we'll move on. We'll close this particular public hearing and move to entertain a motion for this particular request, Z0522, the dimensional variance request.
A motion to grant the applicant's request for a zoning dimensional variance.
And would that include the conditions set out by staff?
With the condition that our granting of the variance would be revoked if the property were ever used for anything other than urban farming.
All right. Is there support?
Support.
Okay, it's been moved and supported. Any discussion from the board? Yes, please.
I have one question for staff. Is the clear vision triangle requirements met?
So there are portions of that existing 4-foot fence that's out there right now, that chain link, that I do not believe meet them. However, because it's existing, there is no requirement that it be taken down now. It's considered legal, non-conforming. However, any new fence that's applied would then have to then meet the requirements of the clear vision triangle area.
So this runs into to your point. This runs into a question that I have dealt with for, 17 years here in the city. What if it's a non-conforming, non-previously approved? And in this particular case, the city, going back pre-World War II, had a clear vision ordinance. And that fence is not that old. So that fence was put up illegally. So what do you do when you have an illegal, non-conforming structure?
If we can determine that it's illegally non-conforming, so it was not permitted to be constructed as it was, then an item like that would have to be removed. We would need to look back and see if we can find a record of when the original fence was permitted, and then take a look at what the zoning ordinance included at that point, and then try to make that determination then.
Well, that fence is within the last 20 years, because I remember that being an open field.
So if I might add here, in 2012, I was here on that board at the time when that fence was erected, then under Sprout. And that was not, at that time, brought up as an item that had to be satisfied. So I'm going to err, and the attorney can correct me if I'm incorrect, but that was an oversight on the city's part, and therefore I don't believe the applicant can be basically taken to task for that particular item due to our own oversight.
But that was a previous entity. We have it.
Mark?
Okay, go ahead.
I was waiting for the city attorney to respond.
I think if I understood you correctly, Mr. Moreno, you're saying because the city did not address what is believed to be an illegal fence previously, that the city cannot act today. Is that what you're saying or asking?
Basically, when this entire conversation was had to grant them the ability to put that fence in place,
So,
we never spoke about it.
so the answer to that would be, it would be incorrect. The city is able to enforce its ordinances today, even though the city missed that in the past on this type of a matter.
My second is, it's not actually against you, Devon. I know you, I appreciate the work you do for the community. I very much appreciate what you're doing and whatnot. The problem that I have is, again, precedence and order. Back then, I was serving on the NPC, and there was a person who lived one street away from Van Buren down next to the river, and they wanted to put in a community garden, and again, they wanted an 8-foot fence, and they were denied because the city said we have a 6-foot ordinance. And that 6-foot ordinance is still there, and I would say, as much as your land is attractive to deer, I will guarantee you there are more deer running down that river than there are across your land. And so I'm conflicted because we have a clear situation of who, not what. If there was somebody else making this appeal in a similar situation, i.e. anywhere along the Battle Creek River, then they would be denied. And that leads me to, an assumption, at the end of the day, this is about who, not what. And Battle Creek has a long history of doing who, not what, to the point of sign ordinances. We have a sign ordinance, so you cannot have a perpendicular sign if you drive down Michigan Avenue, downtown. Yet we have several of them based on who. It's Battle Creek Unlimited, it's the Battle Creek Foundation. These are known people. It does leave a question, completely side note. Why does Team Active have a perpendicular sign? But that's a different issue. But it does state this. We're again back to who, not what. And that is legally the definition of petty corruption. When you're looking at the person and saying, you're worthy, but that person is not, that's petty corruption. In this city, it's rampant in this city for us to do petty corruption based on who? The city runs on who? And it hurts us. I mean, drive down Michigan Avenue and tell me that we don't have a problem. There are plenty of people who want to develop downtown. We didn't allow a guy based on 6 feet, yet we were going to do one based on, okay, this is a new person, he's a better person than the other guy. So we're not going to give you a 6-foot variance. We're going to, we do this all the time. And it's not you, Devon. It is the way the city wants to work. The proper response, the proper way to deal with this is to have the city change its ordinance. We had a guy who wanted to build a garage for his motorhome. He needed a variance of 2 feet. And we said, no, because you're in the wrong district. Even though if that property had been 150 feet west, he would have been within a different district and it would have been allowed. And so the question comes down to, are we going to uniformly and fairly use our ordinances or enforce our ordinances? And as much as I want this to go forward, I don't think that this, if it was anybody but you and Sprout, this would not be allowed, quite frankly. And we all know that, whether or not we want to admit it, we all know that. And therefore, now, let's go on to something else. Can you do something different that would obviate your problem? Can you do a 4-foot fence and a 6-foot fence? What if you change the spacing between the two fences so that a deer, number one, it couldn't jump that far, I'm going to make up numbers. So let's say you put the 4-foot fence and 10 feet away you put the 6-foot fence. Can the deer jump 15 feet to clear both fences? Probably. Or it would bound in between. 10 feet would be too far. What if we move that second fence, 6-foot fence, so let's see, a deer can bound 8 feet. So why don't we set the 6-foot fence at the 8-foot level, at the 8-foot mark, and therefore he doesn't have, he doesn't have enough strength to bound over both fences at the same time, nor is there enough space to do what in the Olympics they call a double jump. You jump to 4 foot and then you jump to 6 foot. And I would propose that. Number one, that would be legal. Number two, it would allow you to adjust for the corner things. And, and it would be fairer to the entire community if we don't grant an exception just for one person when we have other alternatives. And I'd ask you to consider that in the name of fairness to the rest of the committee, to the community.
Thank you. Please.
So just my thought process and some of the statements that were made, take it for what it's worth. Whether or not the existing 4-foot fence is illegal is probably irrelevant to this particular board. I don't believe that our charter provides an avenue for enforcement. If one of the board members outside of this meeting wanted to call code compliance and complain about an illegal fence, that would seem like the avenue, but addressing enforcement of a fence on this board, I'm not sure is relevant to why we were called to serve. In regards to past decisions, I guess I don't find myself feeling very strongly about enforcing like a stare decisis doctrine of what's right is right, and if a wrong decision was made previously, the fact that we should conform to a wrong decision would be something that I would completely reject. Whether or not you see this as a correct decision or a not correct decision, it's a totally different topic, but I'm not necessarily looking to be consistent about past decisions if I'm willing to see past decisions as wrong. I have no idea who the petitioner is. I'm sure you're a perfectly nice guy. I'm going to make my decision completely void of any knowledge of who the petitioner is. I would take a small exception to you all are voting based on the person because I don't know who the person is at all. But it is my intention to approve this variance.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I would like to
I
make
know-
a quick note here with regards to Commissioner Jones's statement of the who. That part is supposed to be covered by our conflict of interest. And if it's a case of a person or persons that we, as the board, know and interact with on a regular basis, and worst case scenario, we have a financial tie to that who, it's our responsibility to disclose that conflict up front before the conversation even gets started, so that it can be examined to determine the level of that conflict, and if it is sufficient, that that person has to abstain from the conversation, the vote as a whole. That is part of our process to protect the integrity, to prevent a situation of who. All of our decisions are supposed to be based on the merit of the particular item. It's not supposed to be a question of the who, as has been stated. It's also supposed to be a matter of the particular of the case. We really throw out the matter of setting a precedence. That's not entirely accurate. Each and every case is decided on its particular merits. And if there is no practical difficulty in that particular item being presented, then it's standing process that we, as a board, should be rejecting the request. We should never invent a hardship just so the person can get their request granted. It should basically be based on what exists. So I understand the need for the fence. Wildlife is pervasive in that area. I mean, it's a pretty rural piece of our city to begin with. And I would hate to think of the idea where we're setting up the situation where the deer could bound over a lower fence, only get trapped in the interior and make a bigger problem, not only for the garden itself, but the safety of, the wildlife itself. And I do agree that the 8-foot would help to kind of lessen that situation, so we don't have to have a case where animals will, in the end, have to be euthanized because now they've, attempted this double jump situation, possibly because they're not going to have the slide rule and says, oh, I can make this. They're just basically acting on their general instinct. So for the safety of the animal and the safety of those working there, because deer don't ask what time they can come through an area. They pretty much are on their own time and agendas. So for the safety, not only the public, but the animal itself, I'll be supporting this particular. Mr. Delaware.
In respect to what Mark said, I think we have to look at each case as an independent case-by-case basis. So to refer to a case that this board, probably many members, had no knowledge of, that it may have been an injustice or it may have not, I don't know. But I also know that each one of these has to be reviewed as a new unit of time, and it's the burden upon the appellant to make their case as to why they should be granted the appeal. Now, whether the case of the one that you referred to 2 years ago, 6 years ago, didn't make a great case, I don't know. But I know in this case, this applicant, who I don't know, I think I may have run into in the parking lot, but that's it. He made a case here. He brought university studies on the distance of proof and evidence that the deers can jump this. He's not coming up with this out of his imagination. There's some studies. The city supports that. I think he's made his case for his appeal. It's up to us to decide. But and as far as other decisions downtown, that's just too much to be putting on one applicant or not, and it's too much to contemplate. we have to look at it as an individual unit of time. And in this particular appeal, in this particular set of details, I will be supporting, because I feel that he's made a great case for the variance. So,
Thank you.
I will address them in somewhat of an order. To your question, Commissioner, or your statement, did you seriously just say that this board has no ability to enforce its actions? You said we have the ability to decide, but we have no ability to enforce our actions. Is that what you just said?
I said that outside of a petitioner's request, it is not for us to go out and enforce code violations. I don't believe there is any request on the floor to address an illegal 4-foot fence. Thusly, I don't believe that we should be addressing the potentiality of an illegal 4-foot fence.
So we have no authority to enforce our decisions. To your question.
I don't think you understood my answer.
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
No.
To your comments, first, a couple of comments. The fact that a 4-foot fence is not going to stop a deer. So if a deer jumps over a 4-foot fence to get into that space, it's going to jump back out of that 4-foot, back over that 4-foot. So we're not affecting the welfare of the animal. And I understand that I'm speaking to the wall here. I mean, all of you have already made your decision, but this is a matter for this community to deal with. We consistently, over and over again, treat this community with petty corruption. And it's time for somebody to say that we shouldn't do this anymore, John. But that's not what we're doing. We have special people, and we will we will make up whatever reasons we want to say that every case is special. Yet, we just quoted the previous guy. We just talked to the previous guy and said, this is our precedent, and this is what we're doing with our precedent. Okay, so we tell one applicant that we're enforcing precedents and we're dealing with precedents, and we tell the next applicant, oh no, precedent doesn't apply. Well, why is that so? Well, because the previous applicant or previous applicants, how many times have we quoted precedent in marijuana cases? Almost a half a dozen to my knowledge. Yet, oh, no, precedent applies in those cases, but it doesn't apply today. And I understand I'm going to be voted against. I completely understand that. But this city, look at this city, and you will see much evidence of our growth being deterred because of petty corruption. That special people get things done and non-special people don't. And somebody has to say something about this. So I will stop my comments. We can proceed to vote at the discretion of the chair.
Thank you. Are there any other comments or discussions from the board? All right then, Crystal, if you'll please call the vote.
Board Member Delaware?
I will be voting yes on this, yes.
Board Member Hanner?
Vote yes.
Board Member Jones?
Nay.
Board Member Moreno?
I vote to approve with the condition that staff recommended in the staff report.
All right, and Board Member Rogers?
Aye.
Okay.
All right, sir. Your request has been granted. Please work with the planning department to get all the necessary permits, and we wish you and the garden the best. Thank you. All right then, that moves us here. We have no further new business. The minutes. We have two sets of minutes that we need to approve. The first was from the previous meeting here in the July window, so we'll take them in order. So on A, the July minutes, are there any objections to the minutes as they were noted in our package? If none, I'll entertain a motion to approve.
I make a motion to approve the minutes on July 12th, 2022.
All in favor?
Seconded.
Oh, thank you. I did overlook that. All right, it's been seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
All right then, minutes approved. The second set of minutes from our special meeting, August 23. I believe that, Mr. Sullivan, you want to add something?
Yeah, so the very last page of your packet, you'll note I've highlighted where the vote was taken on the motion. The vote was 4-1, yes. But I would just recommend that when a motion is made to approve this, that motion be made with the amendment of noting in the minutes that the motion carried.
Okay, so that needs to be added that the motion carried. So that would be the correct.
So moved as amended.
Also, August is misspelled.
All right then. So there's a motion to accept the amendment. Is there a second?
Second.
Excellent. Discussion. All right, all in favor of accepting the minutes with the amendment?
Aye.
Aye.
All right then, those minutes are hereby approved. Which then takes us here to the lovely part of our moment here, comments from the public.
Comments by the public.
And we have nobody from the public here. So comments by the members. Staff did an extraordinary job with this package this time, considering that there was the issue of the 1,000-foot setback issue that created this entire conundrum. And perhaps what needs to be done here to prevent us as a group from having to constantly entertain these questions would be that, one, the ordinance be looked at so that that specific language is pointed out very clearly so that applicants see it, know it, sign for it, and understand it. And more importantly to that 1,000-foot setback, include in the language that our jurisdictional neighbors, and I'm talking about those that are closest to us, I'm not talking about Kalamazoo, but we have Emmett in particular, that information be so noted so that, again, it takes away that huge question mark that we seem to be constantly entertaining about, oh, I didn't know about the 1,000-foot setback. They're in Emmett Township. If it's in the ordinance, at least it's out there for knowledge first. And if they want to contest it, they certainly have that ability to do that with a request for an appeal. At least it's there in writing and doesn't become a question mark after the fact, as we're kind of hearing and encountering here for the last few months. So perhaps that involves taking the Planning Commission into the equation as well. But I would put that out there as a recommendation that I go forward because we truly need to ensure our language is not only accurate but fully explained so that at the end of the day, the business owners have an absolute level field to operate within, and if they choose to ignore it, then that's not for us to have to deal with. It's on them because now it's very much out there in the black and white print.
Commissioner Moreno,
Yes, sir.
is everyone else done?
Well,
Anybody else had a comment?
Well, I think we're on the same page. There was discussion earlier about addressing the November meeting. Was that what you were going to address, City Attorney?
I have several things to address.
Oh, well, the
But that would
first
be
one,
that would be one that would need to be addressed before any adjournment occurs.
Absolutely.
That would
We'll come to
be
you.
item 5D.
All right, we'll come to you. So we're still here in the member comments. So, Mark, you have a comment, I presume.
well, no, I actually have a motion that we move our November meeting to what day?
November 15th.
November 15th.
15th.
To November 15th.
Is there support?
Support.
Can we
Moved and
please take
supported.
a minute to check our calendar, because this is a new date. This is
That was the one, I think,
Wasn't that the one we've
Email.
been emailing about?
November?
the email came out, yes, it was a November one.
November.
Because of the election.
Oh, I got
And
you.
the chamber will be in use at that time.
You're right, yep, okay.
Okay? So, there's a motion to move our regular scheduled meeting in November, if there is one, to the 15th. Moved and supported. Any further discussion? Seeing none? Are we all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Excellent. Then that's for the record.
And Mr. Marino, as a matter of housekeeping, I did not notice or hear that we addressed any unfinished business, even though that I recognize there is none. We sort of jumped over that during the agenda. Just want to make sure that I was aware. And could you clarify for me, when you were addressing the need to look at ordinances, were you talking about the 1,000-foot setback? Is that what you were referring to?
That as it pertains to
And
the marijuana business.
I guess I would ask for
Yes.
clarification on that, because Chapter 1250 Supplemental Zoning District Standards has, I'm not sure whether to say several or many references to the 1,000-foot setback as applies specifically to marijuana businesses already in that. So I'm not sure if you're asking for something in addition to that.
Addition, the jurisdictional question of our neighbor,
So
our neighbors within a reasonable,
Michigan case law has consistently held that where an ordinance is unambiguous, that's the plain language of the ordinance. And our ordinance does not contain any requirement that says our jurisdiction and our decisions of what happens within our jurisdiction stops at our because that 1,000-foot stops at our boundaries. We have to send out notices to those property owners within 300 feet, 1,000 feet, et cetera, all the time that are on our borders. But Michigan case law, in fact, there was a case earlier this year, which I can't cite at the moment, but I know we've dealt with it in one of the appeals to circuit court, which is more on point to the fact that what happens in one jurisdiction, their rules are their rules. In this particular case, dealt with the city of Grosse Pointe and the city of Detroit, and I believe it was a marijuana facility that the interesting thing, within X number feet of school and church property. And this popped up in my mind today because the question about how far away the particular suite was as opposed to the property. And that Court of Appeals held the various ordinances at play dealt with property lines and distances. It didn't matter, that particular one, it said lot. And the church was on a lot that consisted of 26 individual lots. And where the church itself was located was beyond the other communities' feet setback. It didn't matter. The property line was where the property line was. And that was a 2022 case, so we've already dealt with that. So I'm mindful of your request, and I would tell you that the staff in the city attorney's office is looking at the marijuana ordinances and several other ordinances as these issues have come up. But our office is quite confident and clear that the language as to putting language in the ordinance that says, well, it would cloud the ordinance and make it more confusing than to leave it plain and simple as it is, 1,000 foot from a prior entity. But we'll keep looking at that.
Thank you for that last addition, because that was my question, was, while I definitely support it, and I was talking to I'm sorry, I'm forgetting names today, gentleman over here, about, hey, can we give you a little flyer that says, here's our previous cases about this issue, you might want to look at those first. So I definitely agree with the spirit of it, but I was really wondering if we add language, will that open up loopholes that we may not want to address?
Based on what I have read so far and what I know Mr. Baber and I have looked at, we're not recommending any changes, especially given the most recent case that came through this year, but we will keep looking at that through any ordinance revision project.
Thank you.
I said I had several things. So at the point of belaboring the ZBA's time, in one of my meetings over the last 6 weeks, there was some discussion, and this occurs probably once a year, if not more frequently, in terms of what are required to be kept in minutes. And so this is still a little bit of a work in progress, but what I would like to present is just a summary of what I've been looking at in terms of what are appropriate minutes for a particular body, whether they are what we call action or summary minutes, or a verbatim or a transcript minutes. And I started looking through the city ordinances, beginning with 212.02, rules of the procedure of the commission. And that ordinance provision simply states that the city clerk or their designee is to cause to be kept correct minutes of the proceedings. It doesn't go beyond that. This own body, Zoning Board of Appeals at 1280.03, says the board shall adopt its own rules of procedure and maintain a public record of its proceedings. 1280.02, the Planning Commission simply indicates that it should keep a record of its resolutions, transactions, findings, and determinations, which records shall be a public record. Continuing on, the city's Board of Appeals at section 1464.08, hearing procedures, describes at subparens D, minutes shall be prepared which identify all parties present, accurately summarize all pertinent statements made, include all evidence and records submitted, show all motions and actions of each member, and record the vote of each member. I think some of you have been on the Historic District Commission. That body at 1470.03, they're directed to keep record of its resolutions, proceedings, and actions, including minutes of all decisions of the commission, which shall include the reasons for making those decisions. And I want to emphasize that, reasons. There's a little bit of a nuance. The Historic District Commission and the Planning Commission, we're working on making sure that they articulate their reasons with their votes, because it's a requirement under the Planning Enabling Act and under various Historic District Acts. You can't just say yes or no. And it's just a good habit for overall record keeping. So outside of our ordinances, I went to the Michigan's Open Meeting Act at MCL 15.269. talks about minutes in paragraph 1, that each public body shall keep minutes of each meeting showing the date, time, place, members present, members absent, and any decisions made at a meeting open to the public. That's the standard. I looked at some materials from the Michigan Municipal League, which basically summarized the Open Meeting Act and talked about what are minutes providing. They're providing identification, record of official actions, and if they included, highlights of discussion. And they talk a little bit about, if there's pros or cons, the discussion should be summarized, and, minutes can reflect that amount of discussion. So all that to say, there's no specific requirement that I could find in state law or city ordinances one way or the other, but certainly there is a minimum. The minimum standard is a record of decisions and actions. I think many people will lean towards they want a more thorough summary or they want a more verbatim. That's a transcript, and we can get a transcript through the recording. And when we go on appeals, not we, because the ZBA isn't going to file an appeal, but an aggrieved person files an appeal of a particular city body, sometimes they are, if not all the time, they are looking for the transcript to go with the circuit court action if necessary. But as a matter of record keeping, just think about the volume that a full transcript would require. I have received a transcript of pages from a day in court that have averaged in 700, 800, 900 pages for a single day. And we have to keep that. And even in an electronic format, that takes up a significant amount of space, as any IT person will tell you. So that wasn't enough. I wanted to keep going on my research. So I knew the city had many bodies and committees and boards and councils. We have at least 51. And that's actually low because I'm treating all the NPCs as one. So whether we have 9 or 12 NPCs, we haven't done anything in 2 years with the NPCs, so I didn't look at any of their minutes. There were 13 bodies. I didn't look at their minutes. Haven't found them yet. I couldn't find them quickly, leaving that I went through 38 various bodies over the last, most of them were within the last year. A couple were in 2021 or 20, and none before that. So 13 I didn't look at. Nearly all of them are either pure action or action summary. Well, they're either pure action or some of them are action with some summary. They just quickly encapsulate what the discussion entailed, who kind of argued in favor of, and who kind of, some of that reasoning. But it was certainly not a long, detailed account. And as I said at the beginning, I get this question periodically, so I'm going to keep this on hand and have it available the next time it comes up in the next board meeting where somebody wants to get some idea and sense of that. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Right. Any other member comments? None? Entertain a motion for adjournment.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, then, we stand adjourned. Thank you, everybody.